Hey everyone, today I'm going to tackle a subject that I've gotten a lot of video requests for, which is examining this lunar Sabbath theory. Shalom everybody, and welcome to Beit Tefillah. The lunar Sabbath. Here's another doctrine that some people stumble upon, and they think that they've discovered some new truth or some hidden thing, and they latch onto this and they run with it, and they don't even really compare it to the Word. Before I really get ramped up here in this video, I just want to say I'm not picking on lunar Sabbatarians, okay? I'm just picking apart their doctrine. I know many of them personally, and they're wonderful people, and they really are studying and trying to prove out the things to see if they are of Elohim, and they're not. And I'm trying to help with this, okay? Believe it or not. I'm not picking on them. They're really good people. With all my videos, I take what men do, and I hold it up to the Word to see if it matches. That's what I do. So that's what I'm going to do with this. Before I really get too far into this video, I suppose I should define what this lunar Sabbath thing is for those watching who may be new to the Torah walk or maybe even new to even keeping the Sabbath. Because if you're new to keeping the Sabbath and you haven't heard of the lunar Sabbath yet, you will. Lunar Sabbatarians completely ignore our weekly 7-day cycle that we use today, and instead they use the moon to determine when a new week begins and ends. So instead of observing the Sabbath on the 7th day of a recurring, unchanging 7-day week that Elohim gave us, Lunar Sabbatarians restart their weekly 7-day count near the beginning of each lunar month. Well, let me stop right here and say we want to follow the months as well. We need to follow the lunar month and to determine when it starts and recognize it. And we need to follow the phases of the moon to set our scriptural feast days, to set the beginning of the year, instead of following the Gregorian calendar, which we live in a secular world, so we need to follow some of that for setting appointments and that, but we need to keep Elohim's Moedim at the proper time, and we do that a lot when we're not counting the days for the Sabbath to start the new months by the new moon, okay? So we're in agreement there that we need to follow the moon. I just wanted to make that clear. But lunar Sabbath keepers believe that the weekly Sabbath falls on certain days of every lunar month. So they keep their Sabbath on the 8th, the 15th, the 22nd, and the 29th day of every lunar month. Now there's a different, smaller group of people that keep it on the 7th, the 14th, the 21st, and the 28th days of every lunar month, but they're like way in the minority. So for this video, I'm going to concentrate on the other group that keep it on the 8th, 15th, 22nd, and 29th days, okay? The way they keep it means that their Sabbath day during the week constantly changes, and it does not follow a 7-day repeating cycle as the Creator set it up in Creation Week. So that fact right there should make anyone that knows the Torah realize that this lunar Sabbath stuff is not from Elohim, because it does not follow what Elohim delivered to his people. Lunar Sabbatarians may claim that it does, but let's examine exactly what they do and how they reckon their Sabbath, and we'll see. So let's go over a couple of claims they have for keeping this lunar Sabbath. All right. Number one, they claim that the moon sets the counting of the days. Wrong. The sun sets the days, not the moon. The moon starts the months, but it has nothing whatsoever to do with the days. Similar to the secular calendars now, when a new month starts, it doesn't make the week start over. That would be silly, right? Let's read Genesis 1, 14 to 16. And Elohim said, "Let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons, for days and years. Let them be for lights in the firmament of the heaven to give light upon the earth," and it was so. And Elohim made 2 great lights, the greater light to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night. He made the stars also. So the greater light, or the sun, rules the days, and thereby we use that to count the days. How can the moon count the days if it's every 29 or 30 days? We can't. We need the sun for that, right? Okay, so let's read the last verse with a few extra that follow it in Genesis 1, 16 and 19. And Elohim made 2 great lights, the greater light to rule the day and the lesser light to rule the night. He made the stars also. And Elohim set them in the firmament of the heaven to give light upon the earth and to rule over the day and the night and to divide the light from the darkness. And Elohim saw that it was good. And the evening and the morning were the 4th day. So right here we can read that the moon was created by Elohim on day number 4. So his weekly counting of days had started before the moon was created. That's another big clue. Let's read the Sabbath commandment in Exodus 20:8-10. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it set apart. 6 days you will labor and shall do all your work, but the 7th day is the Sabbath to Yahweh your Elohim. You do not do any work, you, nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your male servant, nor your female servant, nor your cattle, nor your stranger who is within your gates. So that right there tells the whole story. This shows we are keeping Elohim's cycle as he kept it during creation week. He set that example that we are to follow. We are on that 7-day weekly count, the same repeating cycle that Elohim set up during creation. Okay, and I'm going to get into that later on. The point is, if you keep a lunar Sabbath, you're doing something other than what Elohim set up. And we're going to go into why the lunar Sabbath cycles are imperfect here shortly. Okay, the number 2 claim is they claim that the Sabbath count is flexible. And this is a passage that they use for this claim, taken from Joshua 6:1-4. And Jericho was shut up tight because of the presence of the sons of Yisrael, none going out and none coming in. And Yahweh said to Joshua, See, I have given Jericho and its sovereign and mighty brave men into your hand. And you shall go around the city, all the men in battle going around the city once. Do this for 6 days. And let 7 priests bear 7 ram's horns before the ark, and on the 7th day go around the city 7 times while the priests blow the horns. Let's note in that last verse that we can hear Elohim's number of 7 being reflected many times. This is his number in the count of his cycles in just this one verse. They had to pay special attention to the count of the priests, the ram's horn, and the days, and the times they went around, not one more, not one less. So the Lunar Sabbatarians will use this 7-day walk around Jericho to somehow prove that they rested on Shabbat, walked around the city for 7 days, and then they had another Shabbat for some kind of pseudo-proof of a 9-day week. That's completely ridiculous. That's not what that says. The children of Israel were told to run in and take the city after the walls fell on Shabbat, and this is why this was commanded on Joshua 6:19. But all the silver and gold and the vessels of bronze and iron are set apart to Yahweh. They go into the treasury of Yahweh. You know, we can't work on Shabbat, but we can serve Elohim, right? They cannot take gold. They could not take the gold from Jericho or any of the silver on that day because it was a Sabbath. So anything that they did, because Elohim commanded it, all of those riches had to go into Elohim's treasury. Just like we can't work on Shabbat and acquire or store up any more riches or money for us because it's Sabbath, right? Okay? So what I thought I'd do next is examine the 3 most popular passages that Lunar Sabbatarians use to prove their doctrine. The first one is in Genesis 1:14-16. And Elohim said, Let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years. And let them be for lights in the firmament of the heaven to give light upon the earth, and it was so. And Elohim made 2 great lights, the greater light to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night. He made the stars also. So with these 3 verses, the Lunar Sabbath guys will try and show that since the moon is in the sky for seasons, as we just read, that it proves that the moon sets the seasons. However, a simple word study will show that seasons here comes from the Hebrew word moedim. So moedim, plural of moed, which is singular, means an appointment, that is, a fixed time or season, specifically a festival, an appointed sign or a time or a feast or a set time. So as I go through here and as I continue, we'll see how this line of thinking of theirs is in error. But first, let's read the second favorite passage they like to refer to as proof. It's in Leviticus 23:1-3. And Yahweh spoke to Moses, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, and say unto them, Concerning the feasts of Yahweh, which you shall proclaim to be holy convocations, these are my feasts. 6 days shall work be done, but the 7th day is a Sabbath of rest, a holy convocation. You shall do no work. It is a Sabbath of Yahweh in all of your dwellings. In Leviticus 23:1-3, that word for feast is also the Hebrew moedim. The weekly Sabbath is indeed an appointed time or moed, but the Lunar Sabbatarians incorrectly assume that the moon also sets this moed. We know that the 7-day count doesn't change, and we arrive at our Sabbath every week by our day count, not by the moon. And the last verse out of these 3 is going to come back and throw a wrench into their gearbox, as we'll soon see. But on to verse number 3 of their favorite verses. Psalm 104:19. He appointed the moon for seasons. The sun knows his going down. Here again, that word for seasons is the Hebrew Moedim. So the Lunar Sabbatarians figure that since the moon is for setting Moedim, and since the Sabbath is listed as one of them, therefore the moon sets the Sabbath. You know, and I can see why they come to this, and I can see why they cling to this little bit of hope, but it's pretty weak. We can't make assumptions in the word like that, especially with all the evidence we have to the contrary. The Hebrew word moed is sometimes a misunderstood word. Moed means appointment. It does not mean appointment by the moon. Let's say if I have a haircut at 2 p.m. on Thursday. When's the moed for my hair appointment? 2 p.m. on Thursday. That's irrespective of the phase of the moon, right? That's when the moed is for my haircut. Let's read this verse from Numbers 16:43. And Moses and Aharon came before the tent of meeting. So this is describing Moses and Aharon simply walking up to the tent of meeting. The word meeting at the end of that verse is also the Hebrew word moed. This has absolutely nothing to do with the moon, but according to Lunar Sabbatarian doctrine, it would somehow, since all meetings are moon-based. See how nonsensical that is? Let's read Leviticus 23:2. Speak to the children of Israel and say to them, the appointed times of Yehovah, which you are to proclaim as set-apart gatherings, my appointed times are these. Now the Moedim, or the set-apart appointments of Elohim, are about to be listed after that verse. They're coming up next, right? The error here comes in assuming that the moon is the sign for all of them. The Sabbath is a moed, but not all Moedim are set by the moon. Therefore, the Sabbath would still be included in a list of Moedim such as we have in Leviticus 23. Here's another way to put it. All Texans are Americans, but not all Americans are Texans. All the feast days are Moedim, but not all the Moedim are feast days. Make sense? The Moedim which are set by the moon are always accompanied by the words day of the month, because they are days of the moon which we know the moon defines are scriptural months. For example, in Leviticus 23:5 it states, in the 14th day of the first month at even is Yehovah's Passover. This isn't saying which day of the week. It's talking about the day of the month. You count the days by going by the sun. Leviticus 23:6, and on the 15th day of the same month is the Feast of Unleavened Bread unto Yehovah. 7 days you must eat unleavened bread. It's real easy to see that those Moedim are set by the moon or month. We get our word month from the word moon. They're cognates. They're the same word, okay? Now, there's a couple ways that Lunar Sabbatarians are going to reckon their Sabbath days, but with both ways, at the end or the beginning of every month, they sometimes work 7 days, sometimes work 8 days, and then they will have a Sabbath or a day of rest. Let's look at a chart of how they reckon their lunar Sabbaths. The days circled are what most Lunar Sabbatarians claim are their weekly Sabbaths when they start over the weekly and month cycle with each new moon. This graphic doesn't represent a calendar as in the Gregorian calendar. This represents a lunar calendar with the days numbered from the start of the new moon. It may look like a page from a Gregorian calendar, but there's no weekdays listed, as it's just an example, as the lunar Sabbath changes days every week. So let's look at this chart, and we'll start at day number 30. So let's count the 30, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then we get to their lunar Sabbath, and that was 8 working days before the Sabbath. In other months, it can be work 7 days and then a rest. There's extra days in those weeks, and the Lunar Sabbatarians are going to call those extra days non-days. This would be hilarious if it wasn't so sad. Does this sound like something Elohim would do, that he would create something as absurd as non-days? Of course not. Or does this sound like a desperate attempt by some people to try to justify some kind of lunar Sabbath? So the command to work 6 days and rest on the 7th day is broken every single month by the Lunar Sabbatarians. Let's read this verse once more and realize there is no wiggle room in it for extra days. Leviticus 23:3. 6 days' work is done, but the 7th day is a Sabbath of rest, a set-apart gathering. You do no work. It is a Sabbath to Yehovah in all of your dwellings. Let's hear some more verses as well, starting with Exodus 20:9-10. 6 days you labor and shall do all your work, but the 7th day is a Sabbath of Yehovah your Elohim. Exodus 23:12. 6 days you are to do your work, and on the seventh day you rest. Exodus 31:15. 6 days work is done, and on the seventh is a Sabbath of rest set apart to Jehovah. Exodus 34:21. 6 days you work, but on the seventh day you rest. Exodus 35:2. Work is done for 6 days, but on the seventh day it shall be set apart to you, a Sabbath of rest to Jehovah. Deuteronomy 5:13-14. 6 days you labor and shall do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath of Jehovah your Elohim. See, I see no mention in any of these of working for 6 days and then maybe even working for possibly 7 or 8 days, depending on the moon. And then you will have these non-days in there, so be careful because some of this gets real sticky and confusing. No, it was crystal clear. You know, as simple and as straightforward and clear-cut as these verses are, people still argue the fact. I don't get it. They have some loose logic that the moon has to set all the Sabbaths, but then you have these commands right here that are absolutely crystal clear, and they ignore them anyway. So can we see what's happening here? That people pick their pet doctrine, and they hold on to that so tightly that they can't hear truth and logic, and it can't get in. You know, it's like the saying, opinions don't change facts, but facts should change opinions. They don't let it. They don't let that happen. Because when you get right down to it, there's absolutely no other way to interpret any of these verses except they are constant repeating cycles of work 6 days, rest on the seventh, with 0 deviations from that 7-day cycle. None. Exodus 31:17. Between me and the children of Israel it is a sign forever. For in 6 days Jehovah made the heavens and the earth, and on the seventh day he rested and was refreshed. It is that particular, repeating, unending 7-day cycle which was established by Elohim in Creation Week that has never changed. It's the Sabbath day that is set apart, and it's the same day every week that is a sign upon Elohim's people. And sadly, the Lunar Sabbatarians use a different cycle than the one Elohim gave us, so most of the time they end up keeping a different day. Only by chance would we get when their cycle goes around, or when they wind up keeping the same Sabbath day as we do once in a while, but that's by chance. It's not because they're following Elohim's commanded cycle. Elohim's Sabbath day is a particular day that is sanctified and blessed, not just any rotating day as Lunar Sabbatarians keep theirs. As a matter of fact, the seventh-day Sabbath that is the same day every week, every month, every year, after millennia and millennia, is the only day that Elohim named the rest he numbered. The Sabbath day is the only thing in Scriptures that Elohim both set apart and blessed. Nothing else. It's that important. So we better get it right. Let's review the Sabbath commandment that Elohim gave us in Exodus 20:8-11. Remember the Sabbath day to set it apart. 6 days you labor and shall do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath of Jehovah your Elohim. You do not do any work, you, nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your male servant, nor your female servant, nor your cattle, nor your stranger who is within your gates. For in 6 days Jehovah made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and rested the seventh day. Therefore Jehovah blessed the seventh day and set it apart. See how we keep it just as Elohim's example in Creation Week? See how we blessed it and set it apart? So to reiterate, and just to be clear, the Sabbath day is the name of one particular day of the week. That same day, every week, that never changes. You know what? It's so simple, but some people can't grasp that because of what they personally believe is more important to them. Because if you add even one extra day during any weekly cycle and resume counting, now you've thrown the whole cycle off and you're in error. Our weeks are set up with the same number of days as in Elohim's creation week. The Hebrew word for week is Shabuah, which literally means sevened. That is, a week. So a week equals 7 days. Some Lunar Sabbatarians will say, well, we still get 7 days, but we just don't count the non-days. That way of thinking just blows my mind. Another big clue to the weekly 7-day cycle is the command to the children of Israel for gathering manna. Exodus 16:26. Gather it 6 days, but on the seventh day, which is the Sabbath, there is none. So they gathered manna for 6 days, but rested on the Sabbath when there was none to be found, and there was never any deviation from that. Nowhere in the Scriptures is there any instruction that fits the bill of a lunar Sabbath. There's no record in the Scriptures of a single person ever keeping anything called a lunar Sabbath, because Elohim didn't create a lunar Sabbath. So it had to come from somewhere. As far as we can tell, no one ever kept or heard of a lunar Sabbath until a guy by the name of Jonathan David Brown invented it and wrote a book about it in 1998. This is a sweetheart of a man right here. After getting out of prison for aiding the Ku Klux Klan in evading authorities after they carried out a pre-dawn drive-by shooting of a Jewish synagogue in Nashville, I'm not making this up, in Nashville, Tennessee, he wrote a book entitled Keeping Yahweh's Appointments, because that's exactly the type of guy you'd want to listen to when it comes to scriptural matters, right? So the guy who literally wrote the book on keeping something not of Elohim called a lunar Sabbath, he was a Christian and a record producer, besides defending those that hated anything Jewish, and he being Christian would obviously disregard Elohim's true Sabbath anyhow, and he wouldn't have any regard for the feast of Elohim or anything deemed Jewish, so he wouldn't be labeled as a Judaizer. And this is who people follow, instead of Elohim and his Torah, when these people keep their faulty lunar Sabbath. Let's also realize another point. With what we know today, with what we can do with computers and with records, and there's new records on tombstones and papyrus and fragments and all different kinds of things being found. Every year there's new discoveries being made in archaeology. We have the ability to match exact dates up with days of the week in antiquity. And we can prove beyond the shadow of a doubt that many Sabbath days were in perfect alignment with the seventh day of the week and not some kind of lunar Sabbath. But many lunar Sabbatarians are going to insist that first century Jews kept the lunar Sabbath. Not sure where they come up with that information, but on the contrary, there are many credible sources that ruin that theory. There are many writings made by the Romans not long after the destruction of the temple in 70 AD. And I'm not going to go through all of them here because they're easy to research. You can Google a lot of this stuff. But they talk of capturing or defeating the Jews. This they easily did on the seventh day of the week, which Elohim named Shabbat, of course. But many years after creation, the Romans and the Greeks named the day Saturday after Saturn, as they started naming all the days of the weeks and the months after Roman or pagan gods. But in their war journals, they cited the day of Saturn, that same day that the Jews revere the most, because they knew the Jews wouldn't fight on that day because they were resting. So this is going back almost 2,000 years, and this shows that the Sabbath the Jews kept was the same day of the week that the Romans called Saturn's Day. There's also comparisons by many other writers that the group known as the Essenes kept the Sabbath day even more strict than the Jews. The point is, though, it was on the same day. We even have pagan sources that verify this, and the list is quite large of writings that verify the Sabbath was always on Romans' Saturn Day. There's also no record in the Dead Sea Scrolls of any kind of lunar Sabbath. And the historian Josephus kept incredibly detailed records, and in all the volumes of Josephus, there is not one single entry or mention of anything called a lunar Sabbath. It's because it doesn't follow the cycle of the moon. It follows the constant 7-day weekly cycle that Elohim set up in creation. The point being, there is exactly zero credible writers of antiquity that mention a lunar Sabbath, because it just didn't exist. You know, this stumbling block, it trips up many people. They get caught up in this stuff, as I said earlier, because it sounds different. There's an allure to it because it's like new knowledge, and they think they're onto something hidden and finally revealed to them. So all the logic goes out the window, and they stay mired in this little trap. It's really sad. And I know people personally, they're good people, but they believe in the lunar Sabbath, and they won't listen to any other Torah teachers because they only want to listen to Torah teachers that keep talking about the lunar Sabbath. So it's amazing what they have not learned because they stay mired in this little pet doctrine of theirs. You know, and I know some other people that used to believe in the lunar Sabbath, but it was kind of confusing to them, so they just decided to set that aside, and they went out and studied the Torah and got to know the Torah very well. Then they revisited the lunar Sabbath theory and saw that, wow, this doesn't match at all. So they went back to the weekly 7-day cycle that Elohim gave us and matches perfectly. When people get into that Torah and they learn it, they read it, they find out that it's a constant repeating cycle of work 6 days, rest the 7th. Repeat, 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 all the way to the end of time, right? Mankind has not lost this weekly cycle. We can go back 3,000 years to ancient secular Chinese people who were keeping track of the weekly cycles in all different, societies all around the world from 3,000 years ago to present day, and we're still on the same day of the week. Hasn't been lost. So the sun sets the days, the moon sets the month, and the stars set the years. And once again, Genesis 1:14. And Elohim said, let lights come to be in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the night, and let them be for signs and appointed times, and for days and years. The same repeating cycle is used for counting the weeks to Shavuot, counting the years to set the Shemitah and the Jubilee. Always repeating cycles of 7. This is Elohim's perfect way. If you step out of that pattern, you have imperfection. And speaking of Shavuot, here's a command that would be totally impossible with the lunar Sabbath theory. Leviticus 23:15-16. And from the morrow after the Sabbath, from the day that you brought the sheaf of the wave offering, you shall count for yourselves 7 completed Sabbaths. Until the morrow after the 7th Sabbath, you count 50 days. Then you shall bring a new grain offering to Yehovah, which is Shavuot. The command is to count 7 completed Sabbaths, then the next day is day number 50, which works absolutely perfectly with the 7th-day Sabbath on the same day every week that Elohim delivered to us. But it's impossible to make this work with this whole lunar Sabbath thing. It's not going to happen. 49 is perfectly divisible by 7, but by the way lunar Sabbatarians do it, it's not perfectly divisible by counting their Sabbaths, with all the non-days in there and everything too. While we live in a secular world that uses the Gregorian calendar, we are set apart and we still keep our Shabbat by counting the days and resting on the 7th day. We count the weeks for Shavuot and watch for new moons to keep track of Elohim's Moedim in their proper season. The new moon in the spring starts our scriptural year every year, and Elohim's cycle starts all over again. It's just so very simple. Many languages around the world still have Sabbath that can be heard in the day they have named for the 7th day of the week. Some examples are in Arabic, Sabbat, Armenian, Shabbat, Bulgarian, Sabota, Corsican, Sabatu, Czech, Sobota, Gregorian, Sabati, Indonesian, Sabtu, Italian, Sabato, and Spanish, Sabado. There's over 100 languages all around the world, and the name they have for the 7th day of the week means rest. I want to remind the lunar Sabbatarians that Elohim numbered the days of the week. He didn't name them except for the 7th day, which Elohim named Shabbat, which always, without fail, comes after 6 days of work. If you keep some other 7th day on some awkward, rotating, ever-changing schedule, you're not keeping Elohim's Sabbath day, but you're observing a counterfeit. You know, sadly, in today's world, the days of the week, and even the months for that fact, are named after pagan gods or heavenly bodies. But we didn't choose that. We didn't name those days. We honor Elohim's Sabbath, not Saturn. The lunar Sabbatarians, they don't honor the Roman gods, but they don't honor Elohim either. They honor some imaginative individual named Jonathan David Brown who invented this lunar Sabbath deception. We honor Elohim's Sabbath that goes all the way back to Creation Week. The lunar Sabbatarians honor Brown's counterfeit that goes all the way back to 1998. When the children of Israel were in the desert, the manna fell for 6 days and not on the 7th, and on for 40 years. And this was to absolutely drill it into their heads that you work 6 days, rest the 7th. Nothing about the moon was said in regards to their collection of the manna because the moon isn't used to determine the Sabbath. It's a weekly counting of days, 6 days of work followed by Shabbat. It has no bearing on the moon. There were no exceptions for certain moon cycles or extra days. Work 6, rest 7th remain constant, period. The lunar Sabbath stuff is all over the place. On any day of the week and always changing with sometimes 8 days of work between their Sabbaths, and that is most certainly not perfection. That is not Elohim's way. Remember, the commandment isn't only about resting on the 7th day, but it's working for the 6 days. So you work more than that, you're breaking that side of the commandment as well. There is no such thing as an 8 or 9 day week. In conclusion, the lunar Sabbath is not scriptural. It's nothing but confusing nonsense that twists the word, misleads people, violates the Torah, and disrupts the perfect weekly cycle of our Creator. Hopefully I explained this well enough for those people who are requesting this video to see that the whole lunar Sabbath theory is not of Elohim. It doesn't match the word when held up to it, and that it's not that repeating cycle of 7s. It just doesn't fit. End of story. Well, I hope this video blessed you. Thanks for watching, everybody, and being a part of Beit Tefillah. Shalom to all my brothers and sisters who are Yisrael and scattered worldwide in the dispersion. Everybody be blessed and have a wonderful day.